There's a hidden enemy lurking inside your home. It's not a burglar, it's not a gun, and it's not some genetic time bomb waiting to explode. No, it's your refrigerator. Each time you open that door, thinking you're choosing something to nourish your body, you may actually be selecting something that's quietly raising your blood pressure, straining your heart, and nudging you closer to a silent stroke or heart attack. Think of your body like a system of water pipes. Your arteries are the flexible tubes carrying life, but high blood pressure, that's like a sudden surge of water gushing through clogged pipes, building pressure at every turn until something bursts. The tragic part? This pressure doesn't come from age alone. More often, it's from what we eat and drink every single day. And here's the shocker. One of the most dangerous foods for high blood pressure is something many seniors eat for breakfast, something that looks healthy but is actually loaded with hidden threats. We'll reveal it in the middle of the video, so stay with us. Today, you're about to discover the 10 foods that you should absolutely avoid if you want to protect your heart, stabilize your blood pressure, and enjoy a longer, healthier life after 60. But before we get to the list, let's first understand why food isn't just fuel. It's medicine, or poison. Imagine your blood pressure as the rhythm of your life. It's the gentle push that keeps blood moving through your veins, delivering oxygen to every corner of your body, from your brain to your toes. But when that rhythm speeds up, becomes erratic, or pushes too hard against your blood vessels, everything changes. High blood pressure, also known as hypertension, doesn't scream for attention. It whispers, quietly wearing down your heart, your kidneys, your brain. Most people never feel it coming. That's why it's called the silent killer. But if you start noticing signs like persistent headaches, dizziness, fatigue, or blurry vision, these blood pressure symptoms are not random. They're your body's early warning system. And the food you eat? It plays a starring role in this hidden drama. You see, every bite you take is either helping your heart or hurting it. Foods high in sodium, sugar, and processed fats act like tiny saboteurs, tightening your arteries, increasing fluid retention, and forcing your heart to pump harder. Over time, this constant strain can lead to stroke, heart failure, or kidney disease. But here's the good news. You have more control than you think. By making simple, intentional choices, lifestyle changes for high blood pressure, you can reverse this trend. And yes, you can start lowering blood pressure naturally at home without relying entirely on medications. This isn't about giving up every food you love. It's about being smart, being aware, and recognizing which ingredients quietly do the most damage. Sadly, some of the worst offenders are hiding in plain sight, on pantry shelves, in frozen meals, in so-called healthy snacks. And unless you know what to look for, you may be unknowingly feeding the very condition you're trying to control. In the next few minutes, we'll walk through 10 of the most common foods that can spike your blood pressure, and more importantly, what to eat instead. You may be shocked by some of the items on this list. In fact, one of them has probably been part of your grocery list for years. But once you know the truth, you'll never see these foods the same way again. Let me tell you a story. Margaret is 68 years old. She walks her dog every morning, doesn't smoke, and swears by her homemade vegetable soup. To anyone watching, she's doing everything right. But one day, she felt dizzy. Her vision blurred for a moment, and her heart raced. At first, she brushed it off. Just a bad sleep, she thought. But when the symptoms returned, her daughter insisted on taking her to the clinic. Her blood pressure? 185/105. Dangerously high. But here's the twist. Margaret wasn't eating junk food or fast food. In fact, she prided herself on cooking at home. So what was the problem? It was that healthy soup made with store-bought broth, canned vegetables, and seasoning packets, all loaded with sodium. She was unknowingly pouring a teaspoon of stress into her arteries with every bite. That's the danger. High blood pressure doesn't just come from chips and burgers. It hides in the places you least expect: soups, condiments, processed meats, and even so-called diet foods. And over time, these foods don't just raise your blood pressure, they change your body from the inside out. They stiffen your arteries. They throw off your potassium balance. They keep your body clinging to extra fluid like a sponge. And worst of all, you feel fine, until one day you don't. That's why blood pressure symptoms are so tricky. They often don't appear until the damage is already underway. But here's the powerful truth. You can take back control. By learning to recognize and remove the foods that quietly sabotage your health, you're not just avoiding future problems. You're laying the foundation for a stronger heart, clearer mind, and better energy today. This is not about fear. It's about awareness. It's about giving yourself the tools and the confidence to make lifestyle changes for high blood pressure that truly last. Because once you know the dangers, once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. And from that moment on, your kitchen becomes your medicine cabinet. Coming up next, we'll reveal the 10 specific foods that could be making your blood pressure worse, starting with a pantry item nearly every senior keeps in stock. You might be eating it this week, maybe even today. Stay tuned. It's closer to your plate than you think. Now that you understand how food can quietly raise your blood pressure without a single warning sign, the next question is simple. Which foods are the worst? Which everyday items are quietly tightening your arteries, overworking your heart, and increasing your risk of stroke, even if your diet doesn't look unhealthy on the surface? The truth is, many of these foods have been marketed as quick, convenient, or even healthy options, especially for busy seniors living alone or managing meals on a budget. But the reality? They're loaded with sodium, sugar, chemicals, and fats that chip away at your heart's health one bite at a time. Coming up, we'll walk through 10 foods to avoid if you want to lower blood pressure naturally at home. Some will be obvious. Others may shock you. But by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to remove and what to replace it with to make the kind of lifestyle changes for high blood pressure that truly work. Let's begin with a silent saboteur found in almost every pantry. They seem harmless. A can of soup for lunch, a quick bowl of canned beans, a tin of green beans for dinner. After all, you're cooking at home. Shouldn't that count as a healthy choice? But here's the hidden truth. Canned and processed foods are some of the biggest culprits in raising your blood pressure. Why? Because they're packed with sodium, not a pinch, not a sprinkle, but often half or more of your daily limit in a single serving. Manufacturers load these items with salt to preserve shelf life, enhance flavor, and make them addictive. But to your body, it's like pouring cement into your blood vessels. Too much sodium pulls water into your bloodstream, increasing blood volume, and that forces your heart to pump harder. Over time, this constant pressure damages your arteries, strains your heart muscle, and leads to the silent symptoms of high blood pressure: headaches, fatigue, chest tightness, and even shortness of breath. And here's the trap. The label may not say salty, but terms like broth, preserved, instant, or ready to eat are often code for sodium overload. If you're trying to lower blood pressure naturally at home, start here. Swap canned soup for homemade using low-sodium broth. Rinse canned beans under cold water to wash away extra salt. Choose fresh or frozen vegetables instead of canned when possible. These small changes might not feel dramatic, but they're some of the most powerful lifestyle changes for high blood pressure you can make today. Because every time you put the can back on the shelf, you're not just skipping salt, you're giving your heart a break. And now that we've uncovered the truth behind those innocent-looking cans, let's move on to something even more deceptive and more dangerous. It's often found in the deli section and shows up on every holiday plate. Ham, bacon, sausages, deli turkey. They smell like comfort. They taste like tradition. But inside your body, they act like dynamite for your blood pressure. Processed meats are some of the most deceptively dangerous foods for seniors trying to manage hypertension. Why? Because they're a perfect storm, loaded with sodium, packed with preservatives like nitrates and nitrites, and often combined with saturated fats that stiffen arteries over time. Imagine your arteries as smooth, flexible garden hoses. Now imagine pouring sticky grease through them every day while tightening the pressure with extra salt. That's what processed meats do inside your body. Even small servings, 2 slices of deli ham, a sausage patty, or a strip of bacon, can contribute hundreds of milligrams of sodium. For someone over 60 trying to manage blood pressure symptoms, that's like throwing fuel on a slow-burning fire. And here's where it gets sneaky. You might think, I only eat a little, once in a while. But if you're adding a slice here, a sausage link there, and a bit of bacon on Sunday brunch, it adds up fast. If you're serious about making lifestyle changes for high blood pressure, this is a place to begin. Try swapping deli meats with freshly cooked chicken breast, baked fish, or plant-based proteins like beans or lentils. Use herbs, garlic, lemon, or black pepper to flavor your meals instead of reaching for that salty slice of salami. And if you miss that savory bite, make it an occasional treat, not a daily habit. Your heart will thank you for every skipped slice. Coming up next, a food group that's everywhere in America. Drive-thrus, diners, and yes, even your freezer. And it might be the fastest way to raise your blood pressure without even realizing it. Golden, crispy, comforting, that sizzling basket of fries or crunchy piece of fried chicken may bring back memories of family dinners, Sunday treats, or road trip stops. But for your heart, it's like throwing sand into your gears. Fried foods and fast food are the worst combination for anyone dealing with high blood pressure. They're high in trans fats, sodium, and refined carbohydrates, a trifecta that clogs arteries, inflames blood vessels, and sends your blood pressure skyrocketing. Here's what happens inside your body. Each bite floods your system with unhealthy fats that make your blood thicker and stickier. The salt pulls in more fluid, expanding your blood volume. The refined carbs spike your blood sugar, leading to insulin resistance, another key driver of high blood pressure symptoms. It's not just what you feel right after. You may not feel anything at all, but over time, it adds up. More plaque in the arteries, more pressure on the heart, more strain on the kidneys, even scarier. Many seniors rely on fast food out of convenience. Maybe you're tired of cooking, or it's what's available nearby. But if you want to lower blood pressure naturally at home, fast food needs to become the exception, not the habit. Here's a better option. Use an air fryer to get that same crispy texture with little to no oil. Bake your chicken with herbs instead of breading. Swap fries for roasted sweet potatoes or zucchini chips. Small upgrades, big difference. And the more you choose whole, simple meals over deep-fried shortcuts, the more you're making real, lasting lifestyle changes for high blood pressure. Coming up next, we expose the truth behind those quick and easy frozen meals you may have stocked in your freezer. They're convenient, but at what cost? They're fast, they're easy, they're just a few buttons away from dinner. But inside many frozen meals and microwave dinners lies a hidden cost, and your blood pressure is paying the price. These meals are often marketed as light, lean, or smart choices. Perfect for seniors who live alone or want something simple after a long day. But don't be fooled by the packaging. Behind those bright labels and low-fat claims are sky-high levels of sodium, preservatives, and hidden sugars. One small frozen meal can contain over 1,200 milligrams of sodium, more than half your recommended daily intake. And that's just the main course. Add a snack or drink, and suddenly you've flooded your system with more salt than your heart can handle. Think of your arteries like a garden hose. When there's too much pressure, the hose wears out, cracks, and leaks. That's exactly what happens in your blood vessels over time when sodium builds up, especially without enough potassium to balance it out. For seniors already experiencing blood pressure symptoms like fatigue, shortness of breath, or chest discomfort, frozen meals may be quietly fueling the fire. But here's the good news. Convenience doesn't have to mean compromise. If you're committed to making lifestyle changes for high blood pressure, try meal prepping once a week. Cook large batches of heart-healthy dishes like lentil soup, brown rice with steamed veggies, or baked salmon, and freeze them in small portions. Use herbs, lemon juice, and spices to add flavor without adding pressure. Remember, every food choice is either helping or hurting. If you want to lower blood pressure naturally at home, replacing sodium bombs with nourishing homemade alternatives is one of the most powerful things you can do. Next up, a beloved comfort food that's quick, cheap, and filling, but maybe one of the sneakiest saboteurs in your pantry. They're quick, they're cheap, they sit quietly in your pantry, waiting for the moment when you're too tired to cook. Factor. But instant noodles and seasoned dry foods like flavored rice packets, noodle cups, and spice-heavy snack mixes are more than just convenient, they're high blood pressure landmines. One pack of instant noodles can contain over 1,500 milligrams of sodium. That's nearly your entire day's limit in one tiny bowl. And that little flavor packet? It's a chemical cocktail of salt, MSG, and artificial additives that can send your blood pressure through the roof. For seniors on fixed incomes or with low energy, these meals feel like lifesavers. But in truth, they're doing slow, silent damage. You may not feel the harm right away, but if you're experiencing blood pressure symptoms like lightheadedness, headaches, or a racing heartbeat, these foods could be making things worse. And here's the real challenge. These products are designed to be addictive. The salty, savory taste lights up your brain like a reward. The more you eat them, the more your body craves them, and the harder your heart has to work. But there is a way out. If you're serious about learning how to lower blood pressure naturally at home, you can start by swapping these out. Choose whole grain noodles without the flavor packets. Add in steamed vegetables, lean protein, and a splash of low-sodium soy sauce or lemon juice for taste. You'll get the warmth and comfort you're looking for, without the pressure spike. This small shift may seem simple, but it's one of the most effective lifestyle changes for high blood pressure you can make, especially if instant meals are a regular part of your week. Next up, a hidden danger that's not in your meals, but on top of them. You probably use it every day, and it could be sabotaging your heart without you even knowing. It starts with just a squeeze, a little ketchup on the side, a drizzle of soy sauce, a spoonful of barbecue sauce to wake up your meal. But these small additions can quickly become a tsunami of sodium. Bottled sauces and condiments like ketchup, soy sauce, salad dressings, barbecue sauce, and even light marinades are sneaky saboteurs when it comes to managing your blood pressure. Just 1 tablespoon of soy sauce can contain over 900 milligrams of sodium. And let's be honest, who only uses 1 tablespoon? Ketchup, while sweet and innocent, is packed with hidden sugars and salt, which can throw off your body's fluid balance, raise insulin levels, and make it harder to keep blood pressure symptoms under control. And here's what makes them dangerous. These sauces don't look unhealthy. They don't feel indulgent. They just come with the meal. But over time, that habit of adding just a little extra becomes a daily dose of pressure your heart can't afford. If you're working on lifestyle changes for high blood pressure, this is a simple yet powerful place to start. Try replacing bottled sauces with fresh flavor. Use lemon juice, olive oil, garlic, and herbs for salad dressings. Try balsamic vinegar, mustard, or plain Greek yogurt with spices for dipping. Choose low-sodium soy sauce, or better yet, skip it altogether and use tamari or coconut aminos in moderation. Remember, it's not about cutting out flavor, it's about cutting out the pressure. And if you're serious about lowering blood pressure naturally at home, learning to flavor your meals with fresh ingredients, not bottled chemicals, is one of the smartest steps you can take. But what if the danger isn't in a bottle, but in a bag of chips you eat while watching TV? Up next, a salty snack that millions reach for daily, but that might be slowly tightening your arteries without a single symptom. You're watching the news, or maybe an old Western rerun. Your hand reaches into the bag without thinking. Crunch, chew, repeat. It's just a few chips, a handful of pretzels, a couple of salted peanuts. But here's the truth. Salty snack foods are quiet pressure builders. That satisfying crunch is often coated in sodium, flavor enhancers, and addictive seasonings that make it hard to stop at just one bite. Before you know it, that small snack has packed in 500 to 800 milligrams of sodium, and that's not even counting the rest of your meals. For seniors trying to manage blood pressure symptoms like fatigue, dizziness, or shortness of breath, these snacks may feel harmless, but they're fueling the fire inside your arteries. The biggest danger? You rarely feel full. These snacks don't satisfy your hunger, they stimulate it, leading to more cravings, more sodium, and more strain on your cardiovascular system. And the worst part? They're everywhere. At the gas station, in your pantry, at the grandkids' soccer game. They're easy, they're cheap, and they're deadly when consumed often. But there's good news. You don't have to give up snacking altogether. If you're looking to lower blood pressure naturally at home, the trick is to snack smart. Try raw, unsalted almonds or walnuts. Slice up a crisp apple. Enjoy air-popped popcorn with no added salt. Even roasted chickpeas or edamame can give you that crunch without the pressure spike. These swaps might seem small, but they are powerful lifestyle changes for high blood pressure that add up over time. Next, we'll look at a food group that seems healthy, even fermented and natural, but can be a salt bomb in disguise. If you love pickles or kimchi, don't miss this next one. They're crunchy, tangy, sometimes homemade. A spoonful of kimchi, a slice of pickle, or a bite of sauerkraut might feel like a refreshing side dish, but for someone managing high blood pressure, these fermented favorites can come with a hidden danger: salt. Pickled and fermented foods are often soaked in brine, saltwater solutions so strong they could preserve food for years. That's great for shelf life, but terrible for your arteries. Many seniors eat these foods for digestion or nostalgia. Maybe it's grandma's famous pickles or a family recipe for cabbage. But just one serving can contain up to 1,000 milligrams of sodium, nearly half the recommended daily intake in a single bite. And that's not just bad news for your taste buds. Excess sodium stiffens your blood vessels, increases fluid retention, and puts more strain on your heart. If you've experienced blood pressure symptoms like swollen ankles, shortness of breath, or a pounding pulse after salty meals, this could be why. That doesn't mean you have to say goodbye to fermented foods forever. If you're making lifestyle changes for high blood pressure, consider these alternatives. Make your own pickled veggies, using less salt and more vinegar, garlic, and herbs. Choose low-sodium options if available. Limit portion size. Enjoy the flavor, not the flood of salt. Balance out salty foods with potassium-rich choices like spinach, bananas, or avocados. And remember, if you're working to lower blood pressure naturally at home, it's not just what you eat, it's how often, how much, and what you pair it with. Next up, we shift from fermented to fermented's mischievous cousin, alcohol. Even that one glass of wine may not be as heart-friendly as you think. It starts with just one glass, a little red wine with dinner, a small cocktail on the weekend, After all, you've earned it, right? But when it comes to high blood pressure, even small amounts of alcohol can have big consequences. Alcohol doesn't just relax you. It disrupts your nervous system, widens and then tightens your blood vessels, and stimulates your adrenal glands. The result? A roller coaster of rising and falling blood pressure. For many seniors, the effects are subtle at first. Trouble sleeping, waking up with a fast heartbeat, or feeling lightheaded in the morning. But over time, regular alcohol use can lead to chronic hypertension, liver strain, and increased risk of stroke. Even more alarming, alcohol can also interfere with blood pressure medications, making them less effective or even dangerous. If you're noticing blood pressure symptoms like dizziness, palpitations, or fatigue after a night of drinking, it may be your body's warning sign. And while some studies suggest red wine might help the heart, the benefits don't outweigh the risks, especially if you're over 60. But here's the good news. You don't have to cut it out completely if your doctor approves. Just cut it back smartly. Limit alcohol to no more than 1 drink per day for women, 2 for men. Choose lower sodium options. Skip the Bloody Mary and go for a spritzer. Always hydrate with water before and after. If you're aiming to lower blood pressure naturally at home, reducing alcohol is one of the simplest, most immediate changes you can make. Because your heart deserves clarity, not confusion. And next, we'll look at the final, and perhaps most deceptive, item on this list. It's not a food you chew, but a drink millions of people sip every day, thinking it's harmless, or even healthy. They sparkle, they refresh. A glass of iced tea, a bottle of soda, a splash of orange juice from concentrate. They go down smooth, especially on a warm afternoon. But inside your body, these sugary drinks behave more like a storm than a refreshment. While they might seem innocent, just a drink, they're loaded with added sugars that wreak havoc on your blood pressure in multiple ways. Here's how. Sugar spikes your insulin levels, and over time your body becomes resistant. That resistance doesn't just lead to diabetes. It also leads to stiffened arteries, increased inflammation, and elevated blood pressure. And let's not forget, sugary drinks often come with 0 fiber, 0 nutrients, and 0 fullness. You drink them, feel nothing, and your heart quietly takes the hit. One 12-ounce soda can contain up to 10 teaspoons of sugar, more than what your body needs in an entire day. And while fruit juice may seem healthier, many store-bought versions are stripped of fiber and spiked with hidden sugars. For seniors already dealing with blood pressure symptoms like fatigue or headaches, these drinks can silently make everything worse. Worse yet, they add calories without nourishment, leading to weight gain, which is another major pressure booster. But you have options. If you're committed to lifestyle changes for high blood pressure, start replacing these drinks with infused water. Add slices of cucumber, lemon, or berries. Unsweetened herbal teas, like hibiscus, which may even help lower blood pressure naturally at home, or simply good old water. Your heart's best friend. You don't need sugary fuel to feel energized. You need real hydration. By cutting the sweetness, you're giving your arteries the calm, steady flow they were made for. Now that you know the 10 biggest food and drink threats to your blood pressure, let's bring it all together and show you how to trade harm for healing, right from your kitchen. Now you've seen the truth. 10 foods, 10 everyday items that seem harmless or even helpful, but are quietly pushing your blood pressure higher with every bite or sip. But this isn't about fear, it's about freedom. Because once you know what to avoid, you're no longer walking blindfolded through your own kitchen. You're making intentional choices. You're turning meals into medicine. You're building a daily routine that supports your heart, not one that works against it. And the best part? You don't have to go hungry. You don't have to eat bland. You don't have to give up everything you enjoy. You just need to swap the pressure-raising foods for pressure-healing ones. Here are a few easy, heart-smart alternatives you can start with today. Instead of canned soup, try homemade veggie broth with garlic, onions, and herbs. Replace processed meats with baked salmon, grilled chicken, or plant-based proteins. Use an air fryer to recreate the crunch of fried foods without the oil or salt. Build flavor with lemon, vinegar, spices, and fresh herbs instead of bottled sauces. Swap soda or juice for herbal teas, infused water, or fresh cucumber lemonade. Keep snacks simple and clean. Unsalted nuts, raw veggies, or a piece of fruit. These are the kinds of lifestyle changes for high blood pressure that don't just lower your numbers, they restore your energy, protect your brain, strengthen your heart, and give you more days filled with clarity and comfort. You don't need to wait for a doctor's scare or a trip to the ER. You can start making changes in your kitchen right now, today, to lower blood pressure naturally at home. If you'd like a printable list of these 10 foods to avoid, with healthy swaps included, just type the word "list" in the comments. I'll send it to you directly. Next, we'll wrap up this journey with a final word of encouragement and one powerful shift in mindset that could change the way you approach your health for good. You've just taken an important step, one that many people never take. You didn't ignore the warning signs. You didn't wait for a crisis. You chose to learn, to understand what's happening inside your body, and, most importantly, you chose to take control. High blood pressure isn't a life sentence. It's a signal. Your body asking for help, gently at first, then louder and louder. But here's the truth. You don't need to fight it with fear. You can fight it with food, with small, daily choices. With each label you read, each recipe you revise, each habit you upgrade. Because every time you put down a salty snack, or skip the soda, or cook your own meal instead of reaching for something frozen, you're not just lowering a number, you're strengthening your heart, you're protecting your brain, you're extending your independence, you're building a future you can feel good about. So now I ask you, which one of the 10 foods surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. And if you found this video helpful, give it a like so YouTube knows it's worth sharing. Don't forget to type "list" in the comments if you want the printable version of the foods and smart swaps. And please subscribe to Senior Health Guide, where we simplify health one heart at a time. Because at the end of the day, it's not about being perfect. It's about being informed, being intentional, and choosing life. One meal, one moment, one heartbeat at a time.